Morning all, everything I hope is well with you. I'm going to talk today just quite briefly about Mark's gospel and the relationship to Titus's campaign. And I always wondered how much of Mark might be put like a scaffolding or like a bare bones for Titus's campaign, because we know that Mark is a little more primitive than Luke, and then Luke is where you find most of these chronological correspondences. But it does look as though you can find these same kind of correspondences in Mark, but there are more in Luke, obviously, and Matthew echoes some of these things as well. But you see the grand kind of this synergy here. The correspondences do fit the synoptics for the most part. And if Mark is obviously primitive, if it's the first gospel, or if it represents one of the first gospels really written, along with Marcion's, it actually explains quite a lot. And we've already been through Marcion's gospel and found that yes, there are some correspondences, there are some of these parallels, but they really become fleshed out in Luke. I hadn't talked about Mark, so we're just going to go through some of these, and it's interesting because you see this narrative development, and in Mark it does exist, and I think there's enough here to be able to say that before Luke even came along, and because Luke and Josephus are so close. Luke acts, and obviously Josephus is used in Luke quite extensively. Lots of people say that Mark is as well, and I think that's probably true. But we're just going to have a little look here at this kind of scaffolding very quickly. So, the scope here, this analysis considers only the parallels found in Mark's Gospel that reasonably correspond to events in Josephus's War of the Jews, following Atwill's thesis. Luke and other Gospel parallels obviously are excluded. And we did a Bayesian analysis, of course, because I love doing those. Markan parallels considered. So it starts in Galilee, just as Josephus was the fishers of men, and fishing, this slaughter here conducted by the Roman military on Galilean these fisher warriors and so on, these rebels. The Gadara incident, number 3, legion and drowning herds versus these Gadaran drownings here of rebels again, and the notion here that this demon is in one of the rebel leaders, and it goes out into the people who are all infected with this disease of thinking that Rome is going to be bad for them and so on. Feeding miracles versus famine, so you get an inverse relationship here, and this is often found in some of these parallels. They just switch things around. Stilling the storm versus sea of corpses. That's a little more ambiguous there, but you'll see here that there are some strong ones. This is a weaker one here, but you see the corpses laying there in the waters, and the stilling of the storm being the storm, this violent conflict that erupted on the Galilean Sea, and then the stilling of that with the victory of Titus, the prophecy of temple's destruction versus the actual destruction here, and the triumphal entry at Passover versus Titus's approach at and around Passover. The cleansing the temple, of course, the temple was cleansed. And Roman ensigns in the temple now. Of course, when they finished the siege and they went into Jerusalem, exactly the place that Titus went into, and we get, of course, Jesus's prophecy here, saying, before this generation is over, I will be in the temple will be completely destroyed, not one stone atop another. Josephus saying this will be completely destroyed, the fig tree withering versus this wasted land. And And the destruction of the fig tree here was just a strange thing for Jesus to say. And why would he go and smite a fig tree? Well, it makes sense if you look at this in the larger context of this siege happening, destroying all of the trees here, figs and whatever else. Abomination of desolation, the encirclement here versus the encirclement and the profanation. Again, this wrecking of the temple, the destruction, the whole brutal, bloody destruction of Jerusalem. And there are echoes of this. Did another abomination, which was the statue here that Mark is probably referring to as well, because there are two events that so closely match here. The veil torn in Mark versus the temple breached and everything getting messed up. Surely temple veils being ripped down and torn. Proclamation of the gospel versus the Flavian imperial evangelion, the gospel, of course the same word, and that would be 13 different parallels here. So they still exist, and remember, you're basically getting roughly one every chapter, and they are chronological. Okay, so strong parallels, clear, sequential, symbolic, and then we get some moderate. So there are 5 to 9, depending on how you look at this, moderate parallels to between 2 and 4, depending on how you break this up. And then so this likelihood ratio calculates to priors and posteriors and so on. But the posterior probability here is 99% essentially. It's a very big. It's 604,800 to 1 that we would see this chronology, and we're not even talking about the fact that Roman historians considered Titus to be the Messiah. Sorry, the Messiah over here. So the conservative favouring coincidence now. So we actually, this was a calculation, a fair and balanced calculation, and I actually left out the fact that it's 99.9998%. A conservative with conservative priors here, so 10% likelihood on hypothesis 1 that this is a 10%. So this is organized and strategic, that people thought they wanted this to be shown. We're using only 10% that is the case, but the favor stacks as you go down the list of these 13 different parallels. And remember, there are 31 in Luke. All right, strong and moderate and weak. All of them, essentially all of them. There were 1 or 2 out of sync, but they are all there. And people don't see Roman provenance. Why the fuck not? Why not? What's going on there? 99.7% for a conservative Bayesian calculation. 99.7%. So I've run this Bayesian analysis just on the Markan parallels. So there we go. And I said, I just asked it today, because I did this a few days ago. Yes, everything in this essay is both verified in the text and reasonably fitting as a parallel. Let's break it down. So you can go through this as you like. I will try and put these up, but you'll find them. They are there. And they fit a sequential pattern. 13. So not as many as Luke's, like strategically here, Luke going through and really fleshing out this. And Luke, I suppose, being, if you like, a kind of master document for the Romans and Roman provenance, along with Acts as well. And remember how Acts is just constantly praising Rome. Paul is speaking from Caesar's household. Paul is being looked after by Roman jailers and so on. There's never really, as far as I have read these documents, there's never one instance of a Roman being badly treated by people. I think since Stephen, maybe that's I think Jews again. It's always the Jews that are the bad guys. Funny that, isn't it? Because they were fighting. Romans were fighting Jews, and then Christianity's coming along and saying, here, peace, guys, peace, let's be nice. What if you worship Jesus Christ here? But if Jesus Christ is actually Titus, here is the game. The game is afoot. We can get you to worship our guy, but we'll do it subtly. And if you look and you pay attention, you'll see the parallels. Anyway, I'll leave that there. I just thought it would be interesting because I had never done too much on Mark. I just thought the other day, well, why not have a little look and see what we can find in Mark? And of course, I've done these things as well. And the astro-theological aspects there of Mark, and this following the calendar through the year in Mark, which remember is only 1 year's about a year of his gospel, of his evangelion, you will find those connections there as well. And I think that is obviously been written into the story as well. And I might be pattern finding, fine, but the patterns consistently are rated here above 90% for a correspondence, just based upon the level of data and the level of synergy. So peace out. Love you all. Have a good day.